Welcome back. So today we'll be working on this car, that car, and probably some other cars. I also wanted to go ahead and give you guys a PSA as well about side feed injectors. This is all kind of leading into something, so but basically I don't like them. Side feed injectors, they look like this, and they go on a hideous fuel rail that looks kind of like this. So a side feed injector, for those of you that don't know what a side feed or top feed, you may have heard the two. A side feed, the fuel enters the injector through the side of it. It sits inside of a little hole and has a clamp, holds it down in place, and then squirts fuel into your engine. The problem with side feed injectors is that you have multiple places for O-rings. And O-rings are fantastic. They work really good, except under conditions where it's heating up, cooling down a lot. They do work good through that, but over time they do get brittle, they get hard, they get cracked. The new fuels, the ethanol and all the additives in the fuel today don't necessarily mix with all of the O-rings from the 90s or even 80s. Nissan used these in the 80s, 90s, I think probably even into the beginning of 2000s, but I can't be positive on that. But I'm just kind of rambling on there. So when these things crack or you have issues, what happens is you now have high pressure fuel going right through this little hole, and that's right into your port, filling your cylinder with fuel. And you go to crank the starter, or even the engine probably tries to fire one, tries to run, or in one cycle or something, or hit the starter, or whatever happens, you end up with that. That is not very straight. Anyways, so that's why I don't like side feeds. I prefer top feeds. Anytime you can afford it, get away from side feeds. There's a company out there that makes a conversion kit for probably just about any side feed application. So anytime you can afford it, I always try to get away from them. Side feeds are they're terrible. But if you have to have a side feed, here are some things that I do. So what we've got up here, it's kind of hard to see. It's a 89, 90 something. It's a Nissan 300ZX, a Z32. These cars use side feed injectors. Anytime you're trying to get a car running, or if you have to have side feeds or whatever your situation may be, you have side feeds, and that's just what it is. If the car sits for a while, the thing that I like to do, you turn the key on, pressurize the fuel system, and then turn the key back off. And then go through and turn the crankshaft 720 degrees. Make sure you go through the entire sweep of the engine. The reason is because if any of those cylinders are full of fuel, it's easier to tell with your hand than it is to tell with a starter that's just gonna push right through and bend rods and lock your motor up. So turn an engine over by hand, make sure it feels good first, and then you can go on from there. That's if it's been sitting for a while. Say you got a drift car with side feed injectors, you know, if it sits over the winter or whatever, first thing you want to do is probably turn the engine over, make sure it doesn't have any fuel sitting in the cylinders. Make sure none of the O-rings are cracked. The other thing you can do, or the other way you can try it, if your engine is easily accessible, or like the fuel rail, if that is easily accessible, you can actually pull these. The one nice thing, you can pull these rails off of the engine and then turn the fuel pressure back on, and you don't have to do anything else. You can do a visual check for leaks that way, but that's oftentimes a lot more work, especially on something like this. So turn the engine over, make sure it doesn't have fuel in it, and then you're probably good to go. Throughout the lifetime of that vehicle, you always want to pay attention to a weird thing that it's doing. If it starts misfiring, or it's misfiring but there's black smoke, or something's happening and it seems kind of funny, check the O-rings on the fuel rails. But on this car, there's actually two things with that. So I always do that with side P injected vehicles. And then I went and turned the crankshaft by hand with this vehicle. And the customer on this one said that he had already had it running. And it's, very possible. But there probably was a lot of noise. Anyways, so turning it over by hand, it did not feel good at all. It actually kind of felt like a bearing was bad on it. I smelt the oil, and the oil smelt kind of fuely, which is sometimes a telltale sign as well that you have a injector O-ring leaking. If your oil smells like fuel, your cylinders might have filled up with fuel, and then it sat for a while, and that fuel all drained into the oil. So I was kind of thinking possibly the worst, but I went ahead and just drained a little test sample of oil, and it looked decent. Not the best, not the worst. Definitely not bearing gone enough to lock up a motor or make it hard to turn or do something weird. So I figured that might not have been the issue. So I went ahead and put a wrench back on the crankshaft, turned it over while I was underneath so I could listen to things. And there was noise in the clutch area. So some of you that are looking at this might immediately have already noticed, but I'm just gonna go through it. Pulled the starter off, turned the engine over, everything turned by just fine. There is no more noise, no more nothing. I also noticed that the starter gear was hung up because there is a little sight patch in here. But you can see there is a grind mark there and a grind mark there. So that means that this starter is pushing into the engine. It mounts up like this, and it's too close to the engine. One way to get the starter back away further, the correct way would be to space the transmission because the starter mounts onto the transmission. So, space the transmission. On a 80s and 90s Nissan, there is supposed to be a plate between the transmission and the engine, which is not there. So that is the issue with this car. I don't actually have any at the moment that are loose, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up a picture right here. So I have seen actually a lot of people do swaps and not use those plates, whether they just forget about it, don't know about it, or what happens with it, I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes people get lucky and they can make it work. I'm probably one of those people. I've probably made that work before, but it's not the right thing to do. When you change that spacing there, you're also changing the geometry and measurements inside between the throwout bearing and the clutch, which can sometimes have adverse effects. When you set all that stuff up, you want everything kind of directly where it's supposed to be. And the Nissan is pretty good at getting everything exactly dialed. So it's always good to put the plate back in there. Like I said, I've probably gotten away without doing it, but it's there for a reason. Put it back. So we'll go ahead and leave this on the side for a minute. We're figuring out if we want to go ahead and order one or see if we can find one locally. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. So since this is up here waiting, we are going to continue back on this. I've got only just a few things left to do. We've already gone ahead and drove it, test drove it. Car does great. It is so much quieter inside, and having a heater while it's cold is also really nice. But we've got some holes behind these fenders we gotta weld up. I've got some holes on the front wheel wells that I've got to find a boot for, and I've probably got some door panels that I've got to temporarily fit on here. I'm sure a lot of S13 people are probably going to get pretty mad because I'm going to end up cutting up some factory door panels. So, yeah. But just another look at the car inside. Pretty nice. I got both sides welded on there. Not really anything special. Not taking too much time trying to make this stuff perfect. It's roundish. It just needs to hold airtight. A lot of people put foam in there. That is not the right thing to do, especially on a drift car. The tire starts chunking, it just rips that stuff out, makes a mess of it. So I try to make sure that everything underneath there is metal. It's a lot harder for a tire to wear out metal than it is foam or whatever people are using to do that stuff with or do their weird little cut things. So I like doing it that way. Take the metal, stretch it up, and then weld it all the way around there. That was a nice airtight thing. The next thing I've got to do is I have a couple of holes. Just a couple. I've got that hole there that wires pass through. Can't have wires in metal. Same thing on this side. Need that rubber boot to go on there. Like I said, you can't have wires on sharp objects, and there's definitely a sharp lip all around the inside of there. So, gotta isolate that with rubbers, seal off the cabin. The way I do these, cut a line through them, because you're not getting that. No, that's too much work. Cut a line through them, put them on, and then use. I like to use Right Stuff. It's really sticky. You could probably super glue it, but I think the Right Stuff has a little bit more flex and it sticks really good. So I think Right Stuff is a better solution to it. It also flexes. So put that in there, glue it up, seal it up. Same thing on the other side. I need to find the other side boot for it. And then I need to go ahead and transfer the door harnesses into the doors, and then get the doors wired in, make the door locks work and all sorts of stuff. Get the door panels cut around the dash, because they're not gonna, if I put the door panels on, they're not gonna close. So I need to cut around, probably just put a little piece of fabric on the metal frame of the door in the area that it's cut, so it looks halfway decent for now, because that's just gonna be a temporary thing, just so it's not a race car on the inside. It needs to be clean and complete. So I'll do that. Those rubbers, I've got a couple of things I got to do under the hood for the engine to make sure it's good for the road, and then it'll be ready to cruise on the street until the season starts. So got the window to work with the switch. The auto function is not working yet, but that might just be a bug. The funny thing is Nissan uses the same color wires from the S13, just reversed. But, so I gotta get that soldered into these wires, and then the window for this side will work. The passenger side, we're still waiting on a door harness for the passenger side, although I might be able to somehow trace something, maybe, I'm not sure. Just for temporary to hook it up so that side works off of this switch, but I'll see about that later. The other thing I want to do is, since the locking mechanism is in this piece, this whole unit, I might try to use this as well. The bolt pattern is actually very similar to the factory, but it does use a different style striker, so I also have to see if I can find a different striker for this to work too. Might be kind of a pain in the butt to hook this up, but I think it'll be easier to do this than take this whole thing apart and try to get it to actuate the factory locks in the proper amounts. That, and then I can get these cables to work on this door handle. But then when we go ahead and do a G door handle later, it should just plug all in. So I think that's the way that I want to do that. But this might wait a little bit. I might just leave this disconnected for now, just until we get the G door panel or something, striker, figure something out. But this, I think this will eventually make its way onto the car. Besides that, that's about it. I do need to figure out the mirror wiring. The Z and the G does not use the same style connector, so I gotta figure out which connector it even is on this harness, and if I can wire it in the first place. I'm sure I can. It shouldn't be too hard, but I think that'll wait until we get a hold of another G at the junkyard and find more parts. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these soldered up. Disconnect a couple of these things, set a couple of things in, and then try to fit the door panel on and see if I can put that switch, that whole switch assembly in the S13 door panel for now. So we will start with that. Okay, so you saw I got the door panel on, wire is in. It's not completely done yet, but let's go ahead and open the door. The door lights are now working. It opens up. I don't know if the key is dead or something's going on with the key yet, but it doesn't pick it up remotely. It still has to go into the key slot. That dings with the door open. So I go ahead and hop in here and close the door. That now shuts off. And then I could even go ahead, turn the car on. You can hear the fuel pump prime. There's a little LED out inside that gauge cluster. Neutral. I still need to work on the cold tune, but there it is. It is working for the most part. I can turn the heater on, change the temperature. Let's see if lights work. That stuff works. I need to get a new switch for this. It's missing a couple and broken. That all works. Should be able to change the brightness. Some of the brightness functions are a little funny. I believe these should have been changing with it, but you can see the clock kind of glitch out a little. But all that pretty much works. I do like the way the lights on, like the headlights and interior lights, are slow to turn on. Kind of like the just like it is from factory. The auto works, but I don't think it shuts off with the light. I don't have the sensors on the dash quite in the right spot. They're a bit tucked up in there and they're hard to get to, but that should work too once I get that set up. Alright, so this dash will be coming back out and we'll end up putting a cleaner dash back in here. Turn the blower back down. But yeah, it is coming along pretty nicely. These door panels are temporary, but it does kind of match up decent on the driver's side, or decent-ish. It's not perfect, obviously, because it's two different styles, but the passenger side I know will end up coming out a little bit worse. The dash is off to that side just a little bit, just to make sure everything on the driver's side was perfect. More worried about the driver's side being perfect than I am that panel coming out perfect. I know when we go ahead and do the newer panels, it is going to take modifying and fiberglass and a whole bunch of upholstery stuff to make everything fit and function and look good, but not too worried about that.
door panel is now cut. I know. It was hard to watch, but she sat through it anyways. Well, it's not perfect, but I mean, it's definitely makes the car feel a bit more complete. Yeah, it's all right. Like I said, it's just a temporary solution. Eventually we'll get G panels, and then there'll be fiberglassing involved and everything to make this style match from that angle to this angle. The G35s definitely have a wider cabin. S chassis are a little bit narrower, so it's going to be a kind of a pain to make that stuff flow into this direction. But once the time comes, I'm sure I'll figure some way out to make it look semi-decent. But for now, this will deaden some more noise and make it a little bit more comfortable cruising this around on the street, having door panels again. So just about everything is covered up. I do need to get the mirror covers done. Eventually I need to do a little piece that goes from this pillar to the window defrost to the dashboard. But that's a little piece and isn't as big of an eyesore. But not too bad. I think the interior is just about done. I may try to put that switch into the panel, although I haven't had to modify that door panel, so I don't know if I want to cut into that one just to put a switch down in place, or if I want to try doing something different. I'm not sure yet. Maybe I'll try to put that switch underneath the panel first, but for now it works. That window goes up and down. This window will go up and down. We just need this door harness. But other than that, everything is working. So I went ahead and drove the S13 out. I've got more work done on this car that I've got in here. And now I'm at a stopping point with this, the S13 as well. I need more parts that we got to get from the junkyard. So that'll be this weekend. And then I've got a couple minutes now. So I'm gonna do some more stuff for the CA build, and namely the transmission. So I've got two big hurdles that I have to pass in order to make this even a viable option. That I have to like machine and create things that I haven't done before. The first one, not too hard. The shift linkages, I needed to be able to drill into them, so I can drill and then press in the shift dowel. I was able to successfully drill through these, so now I'm not too worried about that. That is definitely possible. I can make that happen. The next hard thing is to make the barrel itself, the shift selecting barrel. There's probably machines out there that can do it, but I've got to come up with a way that I can do it here. That way I can mess it up, make new, modify, whatever I've got to do. I don't have to go anywhere and get it done or get somebody else to build it. So I have to make a tool that will cut that barrel. Basically, for those of you that don't know what it looks like, I will put a picture up here to the left or on the whole screen. So you can see that a shift selecting barrel has slots in it machined diagonally, and that's what, when you turn that barrel, it will move the linkages forward and backward depending on which one you want to set up. You can do it, and it's endless the ways that you can modify that barrel. So I will need to make a custom one because I'm obviously doing something completely new. So I need to make a tool that will attach to my lathe as essentially a rest for the barrel, a way I can turn the barrel, and then use the other axis to move it left or right, and drill in to get my depth, and then left and right and rotating at the same time to get my diagonal slots. So I went ahead and found me a chunk of rod. Probably should be stronger than this, but I think I'm gonna end up making the whole thing pretty short. That way there's less deflection, because I need as absolutely little deflection as possible. I don't want too much chatter while machining this. So I've got a pretty heavy duty bearing, I think, that I will run on the end with the cutter, and then a slighter lightly duty bearing. It'd be nice if I could find two of those, but I can only find one. So I've got a slightly lighter duty one that'll go on the back end with the tool that'll be spinning this. And I'll probably end up using just a grinder, just an angle grinder, and make a rest for it, and then this will screw onto the grinder. And then on the other end I will have a chuck to hold on to an end mill bit, or call it, or something. I will figure something out there, but mainly shaft bearings, and make some way to spin that and spin it on the end of a grinder. So the other thing, this is a piston from the CA. Is that I really want to make this kind of an all-out effort with not spending much money. The problem I've noticed with these pistons is that it's common to have your oil ring have holes in it to get oil in there. However, this has a slot that you can just see straight through, and if you turn it this way it's even worse. So there's not much meat there, which means there's not much strength in this whole assembly. So I'm kind of concerned about that, but I think I'm still going to try to shave this thing down and make this as light as possible. All there really is I can do is take off of the skirt. I don't want to do anything too crazy, but it might get crazy. We'll see. It'll get crazy until it blows up. That's good. So the next thing to do is to machine this shaft for the grinder to screw onto, and for me to figure out what the hell I'm going to even put on this end yet. We'll see. So I've got the shaft machined up, 2 bearings. I've got a harder or stronger bearing on the front side. Probably not supposed to be using this style chuck on an end mill type design, but oh well, that's what I got. And then just a coupling bolt there to that. Spins pretty true. So the next thing for this is I have to make the casing that holds this, and then has a arm that comes over and then holds on. We've got the Foxbody back in now. We've got about a month before the first event of the season. So we're gonna see if we can knock out the rest of the chassis stuff on this car, and how we can get it in primer and start putting the whole thing back together. I've got the dash marked out. That's where the center of the steering column should go. The sides aren't exactly the same, so it's a little bit different, but it is about as close as I can get, and I think it should flow as it should from factory. And then we've got the front all pretty much ground down. We got a whole bunch of welds to do. All these holes are just annoying to look at, so we're gonna start plugging stuff. Lizzy's got some plates cut out that we're gonna weld in, and it should look pretty complete pretty soon. So we've got the 2 panels welded back in. Some of the holes are getting welded. We got a couple more little panels we got to make still. And then on the inside, I've got the hole cut for the steering column. I decided to go with just a simple slot through there. No reason to make a whole big hole without all that stuff. So just a simple slot. We'll be using an S13 steering column, but cut up quite a bit so it's simplified, looks a bit nicer, but we still have tilt. But the dash is in, and now I have a way to center everything off of kind of what the dash should be. So from there I can put the steering column in, get a hole drilled in the firewall where it should be, and then start working with the pedals, seat position from there. This main hoop is a little bit farther forward than I want it to be. It would be okay if we had a Foxbody dashboard, but the newer Mustang dash is quite a bit longer from the windshield, so we're just going to end up moving the driver position back further in comparison to the factory Foxbody position. So that's there, front end's there, and I think from here we're going to go ahead and try to test fit the engine and transmission and see if we can make some mounts real quick. And there it is, Sean Boswell with a mullet in the 80s. So the engine's sitting in there. We just got it sitting in there. It didn't really give us any hassles, but from here now I got to see how the transmission lines up with everything, if the height is good, figure out anything weird I got to do with the rack. Like I said in the previous video, the lines that come up off the rack are kind of towards the oil pan. I may be able to modify the rack itself and actually put the lines in 90 degrees off to the side, but we'll see about that later. That's not really an issue. I've got ways I can fix that, but the rest of it, figure out if I like the position of it, where we want to move it, and get it situated in there nicely. So I think that'll pretty much do it for this video, and we will see you guys next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell, and yeah, later.